Your son looks like the kids we serve. Charity case material. My brother Griffin said this at Easter brunch, at our mother's house, in front of 14 family members, while my 8-year-old son Marcus sat 3 feet away, holding a chocolate bunny he hadn't even unwrapped yet. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply set my fork down, folded my napkin, and placed it beside my plate. But I promise you, someone was going to pay for those words. If you've ever watched your child be humiliated by someone who should love them, hit that like button and subscribe. Because this story is for you. Let me tell you exactly how my brother's world collapsed, and how I was the one holding the pin. Griffin Burke has been the golden child since the day he was born. I was 5 years old, standing on my tiptoes to see him in his bassinet, and my mother looked right through me to coo at her new baby boy. I told myself it was just my imagination. Kids notice things that aren't there, right? But kids also notice things that are. When Griffin was 12 and I was 17, he crashed his bike into Mrs. Patterson's mailbox, destroyed it completely. My parents replaced it with a nicer one and took Griffin out for ice cream because he had a scare. When I was 12, I got a B+ on a math test. My father didn't speak to me for 3 days. Griffin got a car for his 16th birthday. A used Honda, but still a car. I got a card with $20 and a lecture about how college wasn't going to pay for itself. I swallowed it. I pushed it down. I told myself this was simply what family did. Some kids needed more attention. Some kids were easier to love. I worked 3 jobs through college. Graduated with honors in English and a minor in nonprofit management. Started as an entry-level grant writer at a small foundation in Philadelphia, making $34,000 a year. I was good at my job. Really good. By 28, I was a senior grant writer pulling in $87,000 annually. By 32, I was consulting independently, charging $200 an hour for my expertise. Organizations hired me to write the proposals that would fund their missions. I had a 78% success rate on competitive federal grants, nearly triple the national average. I bought a modest house in the suburbs, a 3-bedroom with a yard for Marcus. Nothing fancy. I drove a 7-year-old Subaru. I didn't wear designer clothes or take exotic vacations. My family had no idea what I actually earned. To them, I was still just the quiet one who does something with paperwork. Griffin, meanwhile, was the family star. He'd graduated from a mid-tier business school, paid for entirely by our parents at $47,000 a year for 4 years, and announced he was going to change the world. He founded a literacy nonprofit called Bright Futures Foundation when he was 26. The mission was admirable, providing books and tutoring to underserved children in rural communities. The execution was a disaster. Griffin had no idea how to run an organization. He spent donor money on a sleek office space downtown, $3,200 a month in rent, when he could have operated out of a community center for free. He hired his college roommate as director of operations at $65,000 a year, despite the guy having 0 nonprofit experience. He threw lavish awareness galas that cost more to produce than they raised. My parents thought he was a hero. They talked about Griffin's charity at every family gathering. They shared his social media posts about making a difference and lifting communities. What they didn't know was that Bright Futures Foundation was hemorrhaging money. Griffin's donor base was almost non-existent because he'd never learned how to cultivate relationships or write a decent appeal letter. His grant applications were rejected constantly because they were full of buzzwords and empty of measurable outcomes. 3 years ago, I found out how bad it really was. I was at a nonprofit conference in Baltimore, and I ran into Denise Holloway, who worked at the State Arts Council. We'd collaborated on a project years earlier. "Josephine Burke," she said, tilting her head. "Any relation to Griffin Burke? The Bright Futures guy?" I hesitated. "He's my brother." Denise's face did something complicated. "Oh. Well, he's certainly passionate." I pressed her, and eventually she told me the truth. Griffin had submitted a grant application to her organization so poorly written, so devoid of basic program logic, that her team had used it as a training example. As in, here's what not to do. "We felt bad for the kids they serve," Denise said, "if they actually serve any. Between you and me, I've heard their actual program delivery is pretty spotty." I went home and did something I'd never done before. I researched my brother's organization. what I found made my stomach turn. Bright Futures Foundation had filed their 990 tax forms as required. They showed an organization running on fumes. Total annual revenue, $73,000. Total expenses, $71,500. They had roughly $8,000 in reserves, barely enough to cover 2 months of that ridiculous office lease. Their program expenses were shockingly low compared to their administrative costs. They were spending more on Griffin's salary and his buddy's salary than they were on actual books and tutoring services. This organization was going to collapse. Maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but soon. And when it did, my family would blame the economy, or donors, or people who don't care about children. They would never, ever blame Griffin. I don't know exactly why I did what I did next. Maybe I still wanted to protect him. Maybe I wanted to protect the kids his organization claimed to serve. Maybe I just wanted to prove I could fix something without anyone knowing. I set up a donor-advised fund through my financial advisor, completely anonymous. Then I started making monthly donations to Bright Futures Foundation, $5,000 a month, $60,000 a year, for 3 years. That's $180,000 of my own money, keeping my brother's poorly managed vanity project alive. The donations came with no name attached, just anonymous donor, general operating support. I knew Griffin would never question free money. I watched from a distance as my contributions stabilized his budget. He was able to keep the office, keep his friend employed, keep posting on social media about the generous community supporting his mission. He had no idea that community was one person, his sister, the one he dismissed his entire life. I never told anyone, not my parents, not my closest friends, not Marcus's father, who I'd divorced 5 years earlier. I told myself I was doing it for the kids' bright future served, and maybe partly I was. But mostly I think I was still trying to earn my place in a family that had never made room for me. I kept giving. And Griffin kept taking without knowing he was taking from me. Until Easter. My mother hosted, as she always did. Her house smelled like ham and lilies. She'd set the long table in the dining room with her good china, the stuff she only brought out for holidays. There were 14 of us that year. My parents, George and Patricia. Griffin and his wife Sierra, with their 2 daughters, ages 4 and 6. My Aunt Ellen and Uncle Richard. My cousin David and his wife. And me, with Marcus. Marcus had dressed himself that morning. He'd chosen khaki pants and a blue button-down shirt, and he'd tried to comb his own hair. He looked a little rumpled, a little mismatched. His pants were slightly too short because he'd grown 2 inches since Christmas, and I hadn't had time to buy new ones. He looked like what he was, a child being raised by a single mother who worked 50 hours a week and did her best. We settled into our seats. My mother said grace. Food was passed. Conversation flowed in the way it always does at family gatherings, surface level, performative, loud. Griffin dominated the table, as usual. He talked about Bright Futures Foundation, about the incredible donors supporting their work, about the children they served, the communities they were transforming. We're actually expanding next quarter, he announced, reaching for another role, adding a whole new program track. The support has just been incredible. I said nothing. I watched Marcus carefully cut his ham into small pieces, trying to use his knife and fork the way I'd taught him. The families we serve, Griffin continued, they have so little. These kids come from nothing, you know? No books at home. Parents working 3 jobs. It's heartbreaking. My mother nodded sympathetically. You're doing such important work, sweetheart. It's not just about books, Griffin said. It's about showing these kids that someone believes in them, that they're not just, he waved his hand vaguely, charity cases, that they have potential. Charity cases. The phrase hung in the air for a moment. And then Griffin looked at Marcus. My son was focused on his plate, carefully spearing a piece of ham. His collar was slightly askew. His hair, despite his best efforts, had flopped over his forehead. Griffin smiled. Not a nice smile. The kind of smile that precedes cruelty disguised as humor. Actually, he said, his voice carrying across the table, your son looks like the kids we serve. Charity case material. The table went silent. Marcus looked up. His fork froze halfway to his mouth. His eyes went wide, then filled with tears so fast it was like watching a glass overflow. He turned to me. His voice came out small, cracked right down the middle. "Mom, what does that mean?" Sierra laughed. Not a shocked laugh. An amused one. She covered her mouth with her napkin, but her shoulders shook. My mother cleared her throat. "Griffin, that's—" "What?" Griffin grinned, oblivious or indifferent, I couldn't tell which. "I'm just saying." "The resemblance is there. Maybe Josie should sign him up for our program. We could probably find him some books." My father sat motionless at the head of the table, eyes fixed on his plate, hands folded in his lap. He didn't look up. He didn't speak. His silence wasn't neutral. It was permission. Marcus's small hand found my sleeve. His fingers twisted the fabric white under his knuckles. A single tear slid down his cheek and landed on his half-eaten ham. I looked at my son. At his rumpled shirt and too short pants and carefully combed hair. At the chocolate bunny he'd been so excited about, still wrapped in its foil, sitting beside his plate. I looked at my brother, still grinning, waiting for someone to laugh with him. I looked at my mother, who was suddenly very interested in refilling her wine glass. And something inside me snapped. Not loud, not dramatic, just a clean, quiet break. I was done pretending this was okay. I wiped Marcus's cheek with my thumb, gently, slowly. "Excuse me for a moment," I said. My voice was steady. "I need to use the restroom." I stood up. I didn't look at Griffin. I didn't look at anyone. I walked down the hallway to my mother's guest bathroom, closed the door, locked it. Then I pulled out my phone. The bathroom was small and smelled like lavender soap. Afternoon light filtered through the frosted window. I could hear muffled conversation from the dining room. Someone had started talking again, filling the silence my brother's words had created. I opened my email. My financial advisor's contact information was saved in my favorites. Robert Chen had managed my investments for 6 years. He'd helped me set up the donor-advised fund. He'd processed every single one of those anonymous $5,000 transfers. I typed slowly, deliberately. My thumbs moved across the screen with precision. "Robert, effective immediately. Please discontinue all recurring donations from my donor-advised fund to Bright Futures Foundation. Cancel any pending transfers. Do not process any future gifts to this organization. Please confirm receipt of this instruction." Josephine Burke. I read it twice. Then I pressed send. The soft whoosh of the outgoing email was the only sound in the bathroom. I stood there for a moment, phone in hand, staring at the sent confirmation. $5,000 a month. Gone. $60,000 a year. Ended. The organization that had been surviving on my invisible support for 3 years had just lost 82% of its annual revenue. And Griffin had no idea it was even happening. He was probably reaching for another role right now, still pleased with his joke about my son. My phone buzzed. Robert's reply was almost immediate. Confirmed. All recurring donations to Bright Futures Foundation have been canceled. No pending transfers. Let me know if you need anything else. I locked my phone, slipped it back into my pocket. I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was calm. My eyes were dry. I felt nothing. Not anger, not guilt, not satisfaction, just clarity. I washed my hands, dried them on my mother's embroidered guest towel, unlocked the door. When I returned to the dining room, Marcus had pushed his plate away. His chocolate bunny was still untouched. Sierra was showing something on her phone to my Aunt Ellen. Griffin was talking to my father about golf. Everything had moved on, as if nothing had happened. I sat down beside my son, put my hand on his back. "Hey," I said quietly, "you ready to go?" He nodded without looking up. "We're leaving," I announced to the table. Not a question, a statement. My mother's head snapped up. "Already? But we haven't even done the egg hunt. The girls were so looking forward to—" "Marcus isn't feeling well." I stood, helped my son out of his chair. Griffin rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on, Josie. I was just kidding around. Don't make this into a whole thing." I didn't respond. I simply gathered Marcus's jacket from the back of his chair and guided him toward the front door. "Josephine." My mother's voice was sharp. "You're being dramatic. It was a joke." Griffin didn't mean— I know exactly what Griffin meant. I kept my voice even. "Marcus, say goodbye to Grandma." My son whispered something that might have been goodbye. His hand found mine and held tight. I opened the front door. The April air was cool and clean. Daffodils were blooming in my mother's front yard. Somewhere down the street, children were laughing. "Happy Easter," I said. I closed the door behind us. The drive home was quiet. Marcus stared out the window, still holding his chocolate bunny. He hadn't said a word since we'd gotten in the car. I pulled into our driveway 20 minutes later, turned off the engine, sat there for a moment. Marcus. He looked at me. What Uncle Griffin said was cruel and wrong. It says everything about who he is and nothing about who you are. I reached over and straightened his collar. You are smart. You are kind. You are exactly the person you're supposed to be. His lower lip trembled. Why would he say that? I didn't do anything. No, baby. You didn't. Is it because my pants are too short? My heart cracked clean down the middle. It's because some people are small inside, I said, and they try to make other people feel small to match. But you don't have to shrink for anyone, especially not him. Marcus nodded slowly. Then he leaned across the console and hugged me. I held him tight, my chin resting on top of his head, breathing in the smell of his shampoo. "Can I have my chocolate bunny now?" he asked, his voice muffled against my shoulder. "You can have 2 chocolate bunnies. Let's go inside." That night, after Marcus was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. The house was quiet. Streetlight cut through the blinds, casting long shadows across the floor. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the distant sound of a car passing. I opened the Bright Futures Foundation website. Griffin's face smiled at me from the About page. His bio described him as a social entrepreneur passionate about educational equity and community transformation. There was a photo of him reading to children, another of him accepting some kind of award at a gala. I clicked on the donate page. Thank you for your generous support. Your gift helps provide books, tutoring, and hope to children in underserved communities. I thought about all the money I'd given, all the months I'd kept this organization alive without recognition, without acknowledgement, without even basic respect. I thought about my son's face at that table, the tear landing on his ham, his voice cracking when he asked what charity case material meant. I closed the laptop. The weeks following Easter felt like shedding a skin I hadn't known I was wearing. My phone buzzed occasionally, my mother sending group texts about upcoming family events. Griffin posting on social media about his amazing team and incredible supporters. I muted the notifications. I didn't respond. 6 weeks after Easter, I received an email from Robert. FYI, Bright Futures Foundation reached out to the fund administrator asking about the discontinued donations. They were told the donor wished to remain anonymous and had chosen to redirect their giving. No further information was provided. I read it once, archived it, said nothing. Summer arrived. Marcus finished 2nd grade with straight A's. We went to the community pool. We read books together on the back porch. We didn't go to any family gatherings. My mother called in July, her voice tight with forced casualness. "We haven't seen you in months, Josephine. What's going on?" "We've been busy. Too busy for family?" "Too busy for some family." "Yes." She was silent for a moment. "Is this still about Easter?" "Because Griffin feels terrible about what he said. He told me he was just joking around and you completely overreacted. Has he apologized to Marcus?" "What?" "Has Griffin called my son and apologized for humiliating him in front of 14 people?" Silence. That's what I thought. I kept my voice steady. "When Griffin apologizes to Marcus, directly, sincerely, without excuses, we can talk about family gatherings. Until then, we're unavailable." I hung up. If you've ever had to teach your family that your child matters through absence, hit that like button, because some lessons can only be learned the hard way. August, then September. Marcus started 3rd grade. I signed him up for soccer. He made a friend named Diego, and they spent Saturday mornings kicking a ball around our backyard. I heard nothing from Griffin. No apology, no acknowledgement, nothing. But I heard plenty about him. My cousin David called in early October, his voice carefully neutral. "Hey, Joe. Wanted to give you a heads up. Griffin's been telling people his nonprofit is in trouble. Said some major donor pulled out without warning. He's been asking family members if they can help with donations. I stayed quiet. He asked me for $2,000, said it was an emergency, something about payroll. What did you tell him? I told him I'd think about it. David paused. Joe, is there something I should know? Griffin's organization has been poorly managed from the start, I said. High administrative costs, weak programming, almost no donor cultivation. If he's in trouble now, it's because he's been in trouble all along. He just didn't know it. That's pretty specific information. I know what I'm talking about, David. This is literally what I do for a living. He was quiet for a moment. Should I give him the money? That's your decision. But if you do, you should know exactly where it's going. High salaries for Griffin and his friends, expensive office space, maybe some books if there's anything left over. David exhaled slowly. Okay. Thanks for the honesty. Always. The calls from my mother increased in November, 2-3 times a week. I let most of them go to voicemail. Josephine, Griffin's organization is in serious trouble. He's had to let go of 2 staff members. He's so stressed. Josephine, your brother needs help. This is what family does. Josephine, I don't understand why you're being so cold. All of this over one little comment? I deleted them without listening to the whole messages. December. The Christmas season arrived with its usual demands, shopping, school concerts, Marcus's excitement about Santa. I was wrapping presents in the living room when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Joe, it's Sierra. I know we're not close, but I need to talk to you. Griffin won't tell me what's going on. He comes home from the office looking like he hasn't slept in days. We had to pull the girls out of ballet. We can't afford the lessons anymore. Something is really wrong. Please call me. I read it twice. Then I turned off my phone and went back to wrapping Marcus's soccer cleats. January 15th, a Tuesday. I was at my desk reviewing a grant proposal for a client when my phone rang, my mother's number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. Josephine. Her voice was strange, hollow. Griffin's nonprofit is closing. He just announced it. They're shutting down at the end of the month. I said nothing. He's devastated. Sierra's devastated. They're going to lose the house if he can't find another job quickly? Her voice cracked. I don't understand what happened. He had such strong support. Donors loved him. And then suddenly, out of nowhere. It wasn't out of nowhere, Mom. What? I leaned back in my chair, looked at the ceiling, let the silence stretch. Griffin's organization was never financially stable. He had one major donor. One. That donor provided 82% of his annual revenue, and that donor decided to stop giving. But why? Why would someone do that? Maybe they had a reason. My mother was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was suspicious. Careful. Josephine. How do you know these specific numbers? I didn't answer. Josephine. Were you? She stopped. Started again. You weren't the donor. Were you? The silence was my answer. Oh my God. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You were funding your brother's charity, and you just stopped? $5,000 a month, I said quietly. $60,000 a year. For 3 years. That's $180,000, Mom. From me, anonymously, because I wanted to help the kids his organization served. Because I thought maybe if his charity succeeded, he'd finally feel secure enough to be kind. But we didn't know you had that kind of... No, you didn't. I let that sit. You didn't know because you never asked. Because to you, I've always been the quiet one who does something with paperwork. Not worth paying attention to, not worth respecting, and definitely not worth protecting. Josephine? I gave Griffin $180,000 over 3 years. And at Easter, he looked at my son, your grandson, and called him charity case material, while you laughed. While Dad said nothing. I didn't laugh. Sierra laughed. You refilled your wine glass? Same thing. My mother was crying now. I could hear it in her breathing. I didn't know. About the money. It shouldn't matter about the money, Mom. Griffin said something cruel to an 8-year-old child? My child. Your grandchild. That should have been enough. I know. But there's no but. There's only what happened, and what's happening now. I sat forward. Griffin's nonprofit is closing because he never learned how to run it properly, because he's been coasting on my invisible support for years while treating my family like we're beneath him. The money stopped because I stopped giving it. And I stopped giving it because my son came home from Easter dinner and asked me if there was something wrong with him. The sob that came through the phone was raw. Ugly. Tell Griffin I hope he finds a job that suits him better, I said, and tell him that if he wants to be part of Marcus's life someday, he knows what he needs to do. I hung up. 3 weeks later, Bright Futures Foundation officially closed its doors. Griffin posted a long emotional statement on social media about shifting priorities and new chapters. He thanked his incredible supporters without ever acknowledging that he had no idea who the most incredible one had been. I heard from David that Griffin had taken a job at the Staples on Commerce Street. Assistant manager. $38,000 a year plus benefits. The big house in the suburbs went on the market in March. They sold it for less than they owed. Moved into a 2-bedroom apartment near Sierra's parents. My mother called one more time in early April, almost exactly a year after Easter. Griffin would like to apologize, she said carefully, to Marcus, in person, if you'd allow it. I thought about my son, about the tear that had landed on his ham, about the chocolate bunny he'd eventually eaten 3 days later once he'd stopped asking if there was something wrong with him. He can write Marcus a letter, I said. If it's genuine, if it's accountable, if it doesn't include a single excuse, then we can talk about what comes next. That's fair. My mother's voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. Josephine, I'm sorry. For all of it. Not just Easter. For everything before. I let the silence hold. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, she continued, but I see it now. What we did. What we didn't do. How we treated you differently and pretended we didn't. Thank you for saying that. Do you think? Someday. Someday is a long way off, Mom. Right now, I need to focus on Marcus. On us. On building something that doesn't require me to pretend I don't notice when people hurt us. I understand. I hope you do. I hung up. The letter from Griffin arrived 3 weeks later. 2 pages, handwritten. No excuses. No justifications. Just accountability and an apology directed specifically to Marcus, acknowledging exactly what he'd said and why it was wrong. Marcus read it at the kitchen table, his brow furrowed in concentration. When he finished, he looked up at me. What do you think? I asked. He considered for a long moment. I think he means it. But I don't know if I want to see him yet. That's completely okay. You don't have to decide anything right now. He nodded slowly. Then he folded the letter carefully, put it back in its envelope, and handed it to me. Can you keep it safe? In case I want to read it again sometime? Of course. He went back to his homework. I put the letter in my desk drawer, beneath the tax documents and old photographs. Some doors close so better ones can open, and sometimes the person who closes them is the same person who kept them propped open for far too long. I walked to the living room window and looked out at our small backyard. Marcus's soccer ball was lying near the fence. The grass needed cutting. The sun was setting, painting everything gold. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel revenge. I felt free. The months that followed were quiet in the best way. Marcus thrived in 3rd grade. His teacher, Mrs. Anderson, sent home notes about his reading comprehension, his kindness to other students, his willingness to help classmates who struggled with math. He made the recreational soccer team and scored his first goal in October, a wobbly shot that barely crossed the line, but you'd have thought he'd won the World Cup from the way he ran to me on the sidelines. I watched him grow into himself without the shadow of family gatherings hanging over us. No more bracing for comments. No more scanning the room to see who might say something cruel. No more driving home in silence while my son stared out the window, trying to understand why the people who were supposed to love him treated him like an afterthought. We built our own traditions. Saturday morning pancakes with chocolate chips arranged in smiley faces. Sunday afternoon movies on the couch with too much popcorn. Wednesday evening walks around the neighborhood, Marcus pointing out every dog we passed and asking if we could get one. Maybe next year, I told him. When you're old enough to help take care of it. I'm old enough now, he insisted, with all the certainty of an 8-year-old. We'll see. I heard about Griffin through the family grapevine, mostly through David, who kept me updated without judgment. The Staples job lasted 4 months. Griffin was let go in July, officially for restructuring, though David heard from a mutual friend that Griffin had struggled with the transition from social entrepreneur to hourly employee. Apparently, he'd had difficulty taking direction from a 23-year-old shift supervisor. By August, he was driving for a rideshare company, 42 hours a week, according to Sierra's Instagram posts, which had shifted from showcasing their daughter's ballet recitals and beach vacations to celebrating simple family dinners at home and quality time that doesn't cost anything. The 2-bedroom apartment near Sierra's parents became their permanent residence. The girls shared a room now, their bunk beds visible in the background of Sierra's carefully filtered photos. No more designer dresses for Sierra. No more private swim lessons for the kids. I felt nothing reading these updates. Not satisfaction, not guilt, not vindication, just the flat acknowledgement of consequences meeting choices. Griffin had built his identity on being the family success story, the one who was making a difference while the rest of us plodded through ordinary lives. He'd confused my invisible support for proof of his own competence. When that support vanished, so did the illusion. That wasn't cruelty. That was clarity. October brought an unexpected development. I was reviewing a grant proposal for a literacy nonprofit in Delaware, a small organization doing similar work to what Bright Futures had claimed to do, but with transparent finances, measurable outcomes, and a realistic budget. Their executive director, a woman named Patricia Webb, had reached out to me specifically because of my reputation in the field. I've heard you have a particularly good eye for organizational sustainability, she said during our initial call, that you can spot the difference between a charity that's built to last and one that's built on wishful thinking. I almost laughed. I've had some experience with that distinction. I took her organization on as a client. Pro bono, initially, because I believed in what they were doing and because I had the capacity to help. Within 3 months, I'd helped them secure a $75,000 state grant and restructure their development plan to reduce reliance on any single donor. Diversification is everything, I told Patricia during one of our planning sessions. The moment your budget depends on one source, one major donor, one government contract, one foundation, you're vulnerable. Build redundancy. Always. Speaking from experience? I smiled slightly. You could say that. My mother called in November, her voice tentative in a way I'd never heard before Griffin's fall. Thanksgiving's coming up, she said carefully. I'm not asking you to come. I know we're not there yet. But I wanted you to know that if you ever want to, the door's open. No expectations. No pressure? I considered this. Thank you for saying that. I've been doing some reading, she continued, about family dynamics, about how parents sometimes favor one child without realizing it, or while realizing it and telling themselves it doesn't matter. I said nothing. It mattered, she said quietly. I see that now. The way we treated you and Griffin differently, the way we dismissed your accomplishments and celebrated his every mediocrity, the way we let him speak to you and to Marcus without consequences, it took a lot for you to see that. Too much? Her voice cracked slightly. Far too much. I'm sorry, Josephine. Not because of what happened to Griffin, because of what we did to you. For decades. I let the silence breathe. I appreciate you saying that, Mom. I do. But I'm not ready for Thanksgiving. I understand. Maybe Christmas, I said slowly. Maybe something small. Just you and me and Marcus. No Griffin. Not yet. That would be... She stopped. Started again. That would be wonderful. We hung up with something that felt almost like hope. Christmas morning was quiet and perfect. Marcus woke me at 6:47 a.m., bouncing on my bed with barely contained excitement. We went downstairs together, his hand in mine, and I watched his face light up at the presents under our small tree. He got the soccer cleats he'd wanted. a new video game, 3 books about dogs because his campaign for a puppy had only intensified, and at the bottom of his pile, wrapped in red paper, a certificate for a visit to the animal shelter. We're getting a dog? His voice hit a register I didn't know 8-year-olds could reach. We're getting a dog. If you help take care of it. Every day. Even when it's not fun. He threw himself at me so hard he nearly knocked me over. My mother came over at noon, alone as promised. She brought ham and her famous scalloped potatoes. She played cards with Marcus while I finished cooking. She didn't mention Griffin once. When Marcus went to the living room to test out his new video game, my mother helped me with the dishes. We stood side by side at the sink, the way we had when I was young, before Griffin was born, when it was just the 2 of us and my father working late. He's a wonderful kid, she said quietly. I know, you've done such a good job with him. Alone. Without help from... She stopped herself. Without help from the family that should have been helping. Yeah. I handed her a dish to dry. I know that too. She was quiet for a moment. I brought something. In my purse. For you, not for Marcus. She dried her hands and retrieved her bag from the counter. From inside, she pulled a small, wrapped package and handed it to me. I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a photograph in a simple silver frame. It was me at 7 years old, sitting on the porch of our old house, reading a book. My hair was messy. My clothes were rumpled. I was so absorbed in whatever I was reading that I hadn't noticed someone taking the picture. Your grandmother took that, my mother said. She gave it to me after she died. Said I should hold on to it. That I should remember who you were before. She didn't finish the sentence. Before Griffin, I said. She nodded slowly. Before I got so caught up in what he needed that I forgot to see what you were. Which was everything, Josephine. You were everything, and I missed it. I looked at the photograph. At the little girl who had no idea what was coming. Who still believed that if she was good enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, she would eventually be seen. Thank you, I said. My mother wiped her eyes. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I wanted you to have it, so you know that I see you now, even if it's 30 years too late. I set the photograph on the windowsill above the sink, where the afternoon light caught the glass. It's not too late, I said finally. It's just late. And late is better than never. She smiled through her tears. I handed her another dish to dry. In the living room, Marcus cheered at something in his video game. The ham smelled like holidays were supposed to smell. The house was warm. 1 year after Easter, I sat on the back porch, watching Marcus throw a tennis ball for our new dog, a 3-year-old retriever mix named Biscuit, who had absolutely no concept of personal space and had already eaten 2 pairs of Marcus's sneakers. The sun was setting. April again. Easter had come and gone without incident. We'd had brunch at a restaurant, just the 2 of us, with an egg hunt in the backyard afterward. My phone buzzed. A text from David. Saw Griffin at the grocery store. He's working there now. Produce section. He asked about you and Marcus. I read it. Considered. What did you tell him? That you're doing well. That Marcus is happy. That I don't share details without permission. Thank you. He looked tired, Joe. Really tired. But he also looked, I don't know, smaller. Not in a bad way. Just more real. Less like he's performing all the time. I thought about that. About what it might mean to watch your entire identity collapse and have to rebuild something real from the rubble. Maybe that's what he needed. Maybe. He mentioned writing to Marcus again. Asked if I thought you'd pass along another letter. I would. If Marcus wanted to receive it. Later that evening, I asked Marcus about it while we cleaned up from dinner. Uncle Griffin might write you another letter. Would you want to read it if he did? Marcus considered this seriously, the way he'd started considering things thoughtfully without rushing. I think so, he said finally. The first one was good. It felt true. Okay. I'll let him know he can send it. Marcus nodded. Then, Mom? Yeah? I'm glad you stopped pretending things were okay when they weren't. Even though it was hard. Even though everyone got mad. I stopped wiping the counter. Looked at my son. Why do you say that? He shrugged. Because now we're happy. And we don't have to pretend. That's better than having a big family that makes you feel bad. I crossed to him and pulled him into a hug. He tolerated it for longer than usual before squirming away. Can Biscuit sleep in my room tonight? She can sleep wherever she wants. She's going to anyway. He grinned and ran upstairs, the dog bounding after him. I finished cleaning the kitchen, put away the dishes, turned off the lights. Before I went upstairs, I stopped at the window and looked out at our small backyard. The grass that needed cutting, the soccer ball by the fence, the life we'd built with our own hands, brick by brick, without apology. Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. Loyalty earns its place. Some people spend their whole lives trying to belong to families who don't deserve them. They shrink themselves. They swallow cruelty. They call it love because they don't know what else to call it. I almost did that. For 34 years, I almost did that. And then my brother called my son charity case material, and something finally snapped clean through. I never regretted a single second of what came after. Not the canceled donations, not the closed nonprofit, not the family gatherings I'd missed or the relationships that had changed forever. I regretted the $180,000 sometimes. I regretted the years of invisible support, the fixing of problems no one knew I'd fixed, the desperate hope that if I just gave enough, I would finally be seen. But that was before. Now I was standing in my own kitchen, in my own house, listening to my son laugh upstairs while a ridiculous dog with no boundaries crashed around his bedroom. Now I was free. I walked to the living room and picked up the framed photograph my mother had given me at Christmas. The little girl with the messy hair and the book she couldn't put down. I see you, I told her quietly. I see you now. Then I turned off the last light and went upstairs to say goodnight to my son. The door closed softly behind me, and somewhere across town, in a 2-bedroom apartment that used to be a 4-bedroom house, my brother was learning what it meant to build something without someone else's invisible hands holding it up. I hoped he figured it out. But either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. Some doors close so better ones can open. Mine had never been open wider. If you enjoyed this story about protecting your children and knowing your worth, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.